A young girl vanished in 1986 after leaving home on rollerblades, heading to a friend's house she never reached. Her parents didn't realize she was missing until the friend called, asking if she still planned to come over. By then, it was already too late. She had disappeared without a trace. But 20 years later, her parents visit a small local market, and what the father sees in a junk shop display window makes his blood run cold. The afternoon sun, a hazy gold, filtered through the dense canopy of ancient firs and maples that lined the streets of Fern Creek, Oregon. It was 2 o'clock, and the town, with its charmingly preserved vintage downtown, hummed with the quiet energy of its weekend market. Wooden stalls overflowing with local crafts, artisanal cheeses, and the vibrant hues of freshly picked berries created a picturesque scene. Robert Whitmore, however, found little charm in it. He trailed a few steps behind his wife, Helen, his brow furrowed. A familiar cloak of discontent settled heavily on his shoulders. "I still don't see why we had to come all this way, Helen," Robert grumbled, his voice low enough not to carry to the cheerful vendors, but sharp enough for his wife to catch every syllable. 3 days. 3 days in the middle of nowhere, looking at jam. Helen paused by a stall displaying hand-thrown pottery, her fingers lightly tracing the rim of a sky-blue bowl. She sighed, a soft exhalation of patience worn thin but still holding. "Robert, please, we talked about this. It's a holiday, our first in a very long time. Fern Creek is beautiful. Try to enjoy it, just a little." It had taken years of gentle persuasion, of quiet pleas and tearful late-night conversations for Helen to convince Robert to take this trip. Their home in Rockford, Illinois, had become a mausoleum of memories, each room echoing with the absence of their daughter, Emily Grace Whitmore. Emily, their bright, vivacious 12-year-old, had vanished 20 years ago, rollerblading to a friend's house on a sunny afternoon, swallowed by the ordinary, leaving behind a chasm of unanswered questions and unending grief. Since that devastating day in 1986, Robert had encased himself in a shell of sorrow. Joy was a forgotten language, pleasure a betrayal. He worked, he ate, he slept, but he didn't live. Every day was a monotonous cycle of searching, of wondering, of replaying those last moments in his mind. Helen, too, had borne the crushing weight of their loss, but in the last year a fragile shift had occurred within her. The raw agony had begun to dull, replaced by a quiet understanding that they couldn't remain suspended in that abyss of misery forever. Emily wouldn't have wanted that. She had started, tentatively, to suggest that they needed to find a way to continue, to breathe again, even if their breaths would always carry the scent of sorrow. This trip to Oregon, to a place far removed from the ghosts of their past, was her desperate attempt to coax Robert back towards the light, or at least away from the deepest shadows. As they ambled further down the main street, Robert's gaze, typically fixed on the ground or some distant, unseeable point, snagged on a storefront across the way. It was an unassuming place, its paint a faded green, the sign above the door reading "Timber Treasures" in whimsical, slightly peeling gold letters. The windows were crammed with a chaotic assortment of items: tarnished silver, stacks of old books, a chipped porcelain doll, and what looked like a collection of oddly shaped tools. It was, unmistakably, an antique pawn-junk shop, the kind that seemed to hoard forgotten histories. Helen's eyes lit up. "Oh, look, Robert, that place seems interesting. You know how I love vintage things. It reminds me of when we were younger." She gestured toward it with a hopeful smile. "Let's just pop in for a moment." Robert's expression remained unmoved. "You go ahead. I'll wait out here. All that dust and clutter, it's not for me." He reached into his pocket for his pack of cigarettes and lighter, the familiar ritual, a small, grim comfort. Helen's smile faltered slightly, but she nodded. "All right, I won't be long." She crossed the street, her steps lighter than his, and disappeared through the doorway of Timber Treasures, the bell above it tinkling faintly. Robert leaned against a lamppost, the cigarette halfway to his lips. He was about to strike the lighter when his gaze, almost idly, drifted to the shop's dusty display window. His hand froze, his breath caught in his throat. There, nestled amongst a collection of discolored jars and a headless mannequin torso, sitting on a rough wooden shelf, was a pair of roller blades, pink and blue. Battered, scuffed, the plastic showing its age and clearly a child's size. He blinked, thinking his mind was playing tricks on him, conjuring specters from the depths of his grief. But the image remained. He slowly lowered his hand, the unlit cigarette forgotten. He pushed himself off the lamppost and took a hesitant step closer, then another, until his face was almost pressed against the grimy glass. They were undeniably, heartbreakingly familiar. The specific shade of bubblegum pink on the boot, the vibrant turquoise of the frame and wheels, the chunky purple straps. A wave of dizziness washed over him. Emily! Emily had owned a pair exactly like that. No, not like that. Those. He'd bought them for her 12th birthday. He remembered the way her eyes had lit up, the sheer, unadulterated joy as she'd strapped them on, wobbling at first, then gliding, a blur of color and laughter. The cigarette and lighter clattered back into his pocket. He didn't think. He reacted. He yanked open the shop door, the bell jangling violently, and strode inside, his eyes scanning the dim interior until they landed on a man with thinning hair and a weary expression standing behind a cluttered counter. Helen, who had been examining a display of vintage radios near the back, turned in surprise at his abrupt entrance. "Robert, what is it? Are you all right?" She hurried towards him, concern etched on her face. Robert ignored her for the moment, his attention fixed on the shopkeeper. "The roller blades," he said, his voice raspy, urgent. "In the window. I need to see them. Now." The shopkeeper frowned at his abrupt manner, but moved toward the window. "What's going on?" Helen asked. "Look," Robert said, his voice barely above a whisper. The shopkeeper returned with the roller blades and placed them on the counter. Helen's hand flew to her mouth as she saw them. "Robert," she breathed, "they look just like—" "Emily's," Robert finished, reaching out with trembling hands to pick up one of the blades. He turned it over in his hands, examining every detail. "Size 4, that's the size I bought her." Helen shook her head, placing a restraining hand on his arm. "Robert, please, don't do this to yourself. There must be thousands of pairs like these. It's just a coincidence." But Robert wasn't listening. He flipped the roller blades over and checked the bottom. There, scratched into the plastic toe guard, were the initials EGW. "Emily Grace Whitmore," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I carved these myself. Helen, these are hers. These are Emily's roller blades." Helen's skepticism vanished as she saw the initials. She reached out and traced the letters with her fingertip, her hand shaking. How is this possible? How did they end up here, thousands of miles from home? The shopkeeper, who had been listening to their exchange with growing interest, cleared his throat. "Is there a problem?" Robert looked up, his eyes intense. "These rollerblades belong to our daughter. She disappeared 20 years ago while wearing them." "Where did you get these?" The shopkeeper's demeanor changed instantly. He reached for the rollerblades. "I'm sorry about your daughter, but these aren't yours anymore. If you want them, you'll have to pay the listed price." Robert stared at him in disbelief. "You don't understand. These are evidence. Our daughter was abducted while wearing these." "I don't care what story you're telling," the shopkeeper replied coldly. "All I know is these are inventory in my shop, and they're priced at $45. $45? Robert exclaimed. "That's highway robbery. I paid less for them brand new 20 years ago." "Inflation," the shopkeeper said with a shrug. "Plus, vintage items command a premium these days." Helen placed a calming hand on Robert's arm. "Maybe we should just pay for them, Robert. It doesn't matter what they cost." "No," Robert said firmly. "These are ours. They were stolen from us, just like our daughter was stolen from us. I'm not paying for something that belongs to us." The shopkeeper's face hardened. "If you're not going to buy them, I'll have to ask you to leave." When Robert refused to move, the shopkeeper came around the counter and attempted to physically guide them toward the door. Robert resisted, clutching the rollerblades tightly to his chest. The commotion attracted the attention of passers-by outside, and a uniformed police officer who had been patrolling the market approached the shop. He stepped inside, taking in the scene with a practiced eye. "What's going on here?" he asked. The shopkeeper pointed an accusatory finger at Robert. "This man is trying to steal merchandise from my shop." "I'm not stealing anything," Robert protested. "These rollerblades belong to my daughter. She was wearing them when she disappeared 20 years ago in our hometown, in Illinois." The officer looked skeptical. "Sir, if you have a claim to that property, there are proper legal channels to pursue. You can't just take them." "Look," Robert said desperately, turning the rollerblades over. "See these initials? E.G.W. Emily Grace Whitmore, my daughter. I carved them myself, and there's a product serial number here that would match the receipt I kept all these years." The officer's expression changed slightly as he examined the initials. He took a step back and spoke into his radio, requesting information about a missing persons case from Illinois from 20 years prior. After a brief conversation, the officer's demeanor changed completely. He turned to Robert with new respect in his eyes. "Mr. Whitmore, I apologize. The station confirms there is indeed an open case matching your description." He turned to the shopkeeper. "I need to speak with the owner of this establishment." "I'm just an employee," the shopkeeper said defensively. "The owner isn't here today." "I'll need their contact information," the officer replied firmly. The shopkeeper hesitated, then reached under the counter and produced a business card. "That's the owner's information, Victor Manson, but he's not going to be happy about this." The officer pocketed the card. "I'm confiscating these rollerblades as potential evidence in an ongoing investigation." He turned to Robert and Helen. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, I'd like you to accompany me to the station to provide a statement." As they left the shop, Robert felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in 20 years. Maybe, just maybe, this was the break they had been waiting for. Robert and Helen followed the police officer to his patrol car parked at the edge of the market. Officer Brennan, as his name badge identified him, suggested they drove and follow him to the station. "It's not far," he assured them, "just about 10 minutes down Main Street." The Fern Creek Police Station was a modest brick building with a small American flag fluttering above the entrance. Inside, the atmosphere was calm and professional, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil Robert felt brewing inside him. Officer Brennan led them to a small interview room with a table and 4 chairs. The rollerblade sat in the center of the table, sealed in a clear evidence bag. "I've contacted the detective on duty," Officer Brennan explained. "He'll want to take your full statement. In the meantime, I need to verify a few details." He pulled out a notepad and pen. "Can you describe your daughter as she was when she disappeared?" Robert cleared his throat. "Emily was 12 years old. She had auburn hair, shoulder length, and green eyes. She was tall for her age, about 5 feet 2. She had a small scar on her right forearm from when she fell off our backyard fence when she was 7. Officer Brennan nodded, making notes. "And when exactly did she disappear?" "June 15th, 1986, Helen answered, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. "It was a Sunday afternoon, around 3 p.m. She was going to her friend Samantha's house about half a mile away. She wanted to show off her new rollerblades." "She never arrived at Samantha's," Robert continued. "We didn't realize anything was wrong until Samantha's mother called around 5 p.m. asking if Emily was still coming over." The door opened, and a man in plain clothes entered. He was in his 40s, with salt and pepper hair and a serious expression. "I'm Detective Marshall," he introduced himself, shaking hands with Robert and Helen. I understand you've discovered a potential lead in your daughter's disappearance. Robert nodded toward the evidence bag. Those are Emily's rollerblades. I'm sure of it. Detective Marshall sat down across from them. I've contacted the authorities in Illinois. They're sending over the case files, but it may take a few hours. In the meantime, I'd like to hear the full story from you. For the next hour, Robert and Helen took turns explaining the events surrounding Emily's disappearance. They described the massive search efforts, the volunteer teams that combed the woods and neighborhoods, the flyers they had distributed across the state and beyond. We never stopped looking, Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. I took a leave of absence from work that first year. We set up a tip line, hired private investigators when the police investigation stalled. But there was never anything solid, just nothing. Detective Marshall nodded sympathetically. And now, after all this time, you find her rollerblades in a small town in Oregon. It's quite extraordinary. Is there any way to trace how they ended up here? Helen asked. The shop employee wasn't very helpful. We're working on that, Detective Marshall assured her. I've dispatched another officer to run a background check on the shop owner, Victor Manson. We'll also visit the shop tomorrow to examine their inventory records. He turned his attention to the rollerblades, carefully removing them from the evidence bag with gloved hands. These will be photographed and logged as evidence. We'll also check for any prints or trace evidence, though after 20 years, that's unlikely to yield much. As he spoke, another officer entered with a folder. Detective Marshall reviewed its contents, his expression turning thoughtful. Mr. Manson purchased Timber Treasures 18 years ago, he informed them. Prior to that, he appears to have moved around quite a bit. No criminal record, but not much of a paper trail either. He showed them a DMV photo of Victor Manson, a man in his 50s with thinning hair and a stern expression. Do you recognize this man? He asked. Robert and Helen both shook their heads. He'll be back in town in 2 days, according to his employee, Detective Marshall continued. We'll bring him in for questioning then. By the time all the preliminary work was done, the sun was setting outside the station windows. Detective Marshall escorted Robert and Helen to the station entrance. We'll continue investigating this lead, he promised. I've assigned an officer to revisit the shop tomorrow, see if there might be any other items connected to your daughter. In the meantime, try to get some rest. As they stepped outside into the fading daylight, Robert felt a strange mixture of hope and dread. The rollerblades were real, tangible proof that somehow, somewhere, there might be answers about what happened to Emily. But what those answers might reveal after all these years terrified him more than he cared to admit. The sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and pink as Robert and Helen made their way back toward the market. Despite the lateness of the hour, Robert insisted on returning to Timber Treasures. The police will handle it, Robert, Helen said, tugging gently at his arm. We should go back to our Airbnb and rest. It's been a draining day. I need to see it again, Robert insisted, his pace quickening. There might be something else there, something we missed. Helen sighed, but followed him nonetheless, recognizing the determined set of his jaw. Most of the market stalls had been dismantled for the day, with vendors packing up their unsold goods. Only a few restaurants remained open, their warm lights glowing invitingly in the gathering dusk. As they approached Timber Treasures, they saw the shopkeeper from earlier locking the front door. He spotted them and visibly tensed, his movements becoming hurried. "Look, there's someone else coming out," Helen whispered, pointing to a side door that Robert hadn't noticed earlier. A man emerged from the alley beside the shop. He wore a leather jacket and a cowboy hat pulled low over his face, but even from a distance, there was something familiar about his profile. Robert squinted, trying to place him. "He looks like the man in the photo," Robert murmured. "The one the detective showed us. Victor Manson." Helen frowned. But the detective said he wouldn't be back for 2 days. Why would the shopkeeper lie to the police? They watched as the man crossed the street toward a black sedan parked outside a toy shop. Another man stood waiting beside the car, and next to him was a little girl, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, with blonde pigtails. The man in the cowboy hat approached the girl first, crouching down to her level. He reached out to embrace her, but the child visibly recoiled, turning her face away. When he tousled her hair, she flinched. "Something's not right," Robert said, his protective instincts flaring. "That child is afraid of him." "We can't be sure of that, Robert," Helen said cautiously. "It might be nothing. Kids often get moody, especially after being told they can't have a toy they wanted." Robert nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were witnessing something sinister. The interaction seemed off, laden with an undercurrent of tension that sent chills down his spine. They watched as the three figures got into the black car and drove away. Robert turned his attention back to the shopkeeper, who was now walking briskly down the street, headed for a bus stop. Without thinking, Robert jogged after him. "Excuse me," he called out. The shopkeeper turned, his expression souring when he recognized Robert. "What now?" "The police already took what you wanted." "That man who just left through the side door," Robert said, catching his breath. "Was that Victor Manson, the owner?" The shopkeeper's eyes narrowed. "I don't have to answer your questions. If the police want information, they can ask me directly." "Just tell me if that was him," Robert pressed. The shopkeeper rolled his eyes. "Geez, you people just can't calm down, can you? No, that wasn't the boss. It was his brother. Now are you satisfied? Go away and leave me alone?" With that, he boarded a bus that had just pulled up to the stop, effectively ending the conversation. Helen caught up to Robert as the bus pulled away. "What did he say?" "He claims it was Manson's brother, not Manson himself," Robert replied, his brow furrowed. "But why didn't he mention to the police that his brother is here if the owner is out of town?" Helen shivered, pulling her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. "I don't know, Robert, but it's getting dark and we're both exhausted. Let's go back to the Airbnb and call Detective Marshall in the morning." Robert hesitated, torn between pursuing this new lead and acknowledging the wisdom in Helen's words. Finally, he nodded, taking one last look at Timber Treasures before allowing Helen to guide him away. "Tomorrow," he promised himself, "tomorrow we'll get answers." Their Airbnb was a cozy second-floor apartment in a converted Victorian house, located in a quiet residential neighborhood just a few blocks from the market. The pale blue exterior and white gingerbread trim gave it a quaint, nostalgic feel that had initially appealed to Helen when she booked it. As they approached the building, Helen touched Robert's arm. "I'm going to run down to that Chinese restaurant we passed on the corner. I could use some comfort food after today." Robert nodded, fishing the apartment key from his pocket. "I'll wait here. Could use a smoke to clear my head." Once Helen had disappeared around the corner, Robert sat on the building's front steps and lit a cigarette. He inhaled deeply, letting the smoke fill his lungs before exhaling toward the darkening sky. The familiar ritual calmed him somewhat, allowing his mind to process the day's extraordinary events. Finding Emily's rollerblades after all these years couldn't be a coincidence. They were a link, a tangible connection to his daughter that had been missing for 2 decades. But what did it mean? How had they ended up in a junk shop in Oregon, thousands of miles from where she had disappeared? His hand shook slightly as he took another drag. If the rollerblades had made their way here, was it possible that Emily had too? And if so, was she still alive? The thought both exhilarated and terrified him. For 20 years he had lived in a state of suspended grief, unable to fully mourn a daughter who might still be out there somewhere. The rollerblades had reignited a hope he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Robert pulled out his phone and began searching for information about Victor Manson and Timber Treasures. There wasn't much: a sparse business website showing the shop's exterior and hours, a few online reviews praising its eclectic selection. Nothing about Manson personally. As he scrolled, a movement across the street caught his attention. A small figure was partially hidden behind a street lamp, watching the buildings. Robert squinted through the gathering darkness. It was a child, a girl, maybe 10 or 11 years old. Robert extinguished his cigarette and stood up. "Hello there," he called out, keeping his voice gentle. "Are you okay?" The girl remained frozen for a moment, then took a tentative step forward. She was thin, with dirty blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, and wore clothes that seemed too large for her small frame. "Are you looking for someone?" Robert asked, approaching carefully. The girl looked up at him with wide, serious eyes. "Please, sir," she said in a small voice, "can you help me save my sister? A bad man took her?" Robert glanced around, suddenly alert. Was this some kind of setup? A distraction while someone broke into the apartment? But the street was quiet, no suspicious vehicles or lurking figures. "What's your name?" he asked, crouching down to her level. "Carla," the girl replied. "Please, I need help. No one believes me." "Who sent you here, Carla?" "No one sent me," she insisted. "I'm alone. I ran away from the orphanage to find my sister. I saw her today, but I was too scared to help her by myself." Robert's thoughts raced. An orphaned girl, a missing sister. It echoed his own situation too closely to be coincidental. "Your sister? Where did you see her?" "In the market," Carla said, "with the man in the hat. She's scared of him, but she has to pretend she's not." Robert's breath caught. The little girl with the pigtails. The one who had flinched when the man touched her hair. "This man in the hat," Robert said carefully. "Is he tall, with thinning hair? Wears a leather jacket?" Carla nodded vigorously. "That's him. He took Jasmine from the orphanage. Said he adopted her, but it's not true. He's a bad man." Robert's mind raced. He thought of Emily, of the years stolen from her, of the answers that had eluded him for 2 decades. And now this child stood before him, facing the same potential tragedy. "Do you know where they took your sister?" he asked. Carla nodded. "I followed them before. I know where they go, but I can't get her out alone." Robert's conscience warred with his caution. This could be dangerous, possibly illegal. The right thing would be to call the police, let them handle it. But he knew the frustration of official channels, of procedures and protocols that moved too slowly while a child remained in danger. "Let me help you," he found himself saying. "Let me get my car." He sent a quick text to Helen. "Taking the car for a bit. Something came up. Use your key. Start dinner without me. Be back soon." As they climbed into his rental car, Robert knew he might be making a terrible mistake. But he also knew he couldn't live with himself if he turned away from this child's plea for help, not when he had spent 20 years wishing someone had been there to help his own daughter. The rental car hummed quietly as Robert followed Carla's directions, taking turn after turn through Fern Creek's residential neighborhoods. The houses grew farther apart, the streetlights becoming scarcer. "It's over there," Carla said finally, pointing to a small camper park tucked behind a copse of trees. Robert parked at the entrance and cut the engine. In the dim light, he could make out several RVs and campers arranged in a loose semicircle. At the far end sat a lone camper van, its windows glowing with yellow light. "That's it," Carla whispered. Robert hesitated, his hand on the door handle. "Carla, are you absolutely sure your sister is in there? This is very serious." The girl nodded, her eyes solemn. "Please, we have to help Jasmine." Against his better judgment, Robert got out of the car. "Stay close to me," he instructed Carla. "And if anything seems wrong, we leave immediately. Understand?" They approached the camper van cautiously. There was no sound from inside, no indication of how many people might be within. Robert's heart pounded in his chest as he raised his hand and knocked firmly on the door. Seconds stretched into a minute with no response. He knocked again, louder this time. Finally, the door swung open. A man stood in the doorway, backlit by the camper's interior lights. Robert recognized him as the other man from outside the toy shop, not the one in the cowboy hat, but the one who had been waiting by the car. The man's eyes widened when he saw Carla, then narrowed as they shifted to Robert. "Who the hell are you, and what do you want?" he demanded. "My name is Robert," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "This girl came to me for help. She says her sister is taken here." The man's face darkened. "My name's Mike, and you've got it all wrong. Nobody's being held against their will here." He turned his glare to Carla. "This one's a troublemaker. Been causing problems since her sister got adopted." "Adopted?" Robert echoed. Mike nodded. "That's right. Jasmine was legally adopted from St. Catherine's orphanage by my boss. I'm just his assistant. This one," he jerked his thumb toward Carla, "couldn't accept that and has been making up wild stories ever since." "Lie! Lie!" Carla shouted, her small face contorted with anger. "You took her. You and that man. You took my sister." "What man?" Robert asked, though he already suspected the answer. "The girl was adopted by my boss," Mike explained with exaggerated patience. "His brother went with me to pick her up because my boss is out of town on business. Everything was done legally." Robert found himself torn between believing the man's plausible explanation and the raw conviction in Carla's voice. "Look," he said, attempting a reasonable tone, "I'm sure we can sort this out. Maybe I could speak with your boss or even see Jasmine for a moment. If the sisters could talk briefly, say a proper goodbye, perhaps that would help everyone move on." Mike's expression hardened. "That's not possible. Jasmine isn't here. She's already been taken to her new home in another car." As he spoke, Robert heard a faint noise from inside the camper, a soft shushing sound, followed by what might have been a child's whisper. Mike quickly glanced over his shoulder, then back at Robert. "That's just my kid," he said dismissively. "Look, I suggest you take that girl back to St. Catherine's before you find yourself in trouble for child endangerment. Whoever you are, you've got no right taking a minor out of town without authorization." "I was only trying to help," Robert began. "Help?" Mike scoffed. "By kidnapping an orphan based on her wild stories? Return her to the orphanage, or next time I'll be calling the police." With that, he slammed the door in their faces. Robert stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. The man's explanation was logical, but something felt off about the whole situation. "He's lying," Carla insisted as they walked back to the car. "Jasmine is in there. I know it." "You heard him," Robert said gently. "Your sister has been adopted. It might be hard to accept, but—" "No," Carla stamped her foot. "That's not true. Please, you have to believe me." Robert sighed, uncertain what to do next. The right thing would be to return Carla to the orphanage, as Mike had suggested, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right about the situation. "Let's get back to the car," he said finally. "We'll figure this out." Back in the car, Robert turned to Carla, who sat slumped in the passenger seat, her small face set in a stubborn frown. "Carla," he began gently, "I understand you're worried about your sister, but I have to take you back to the orphanage. I could get in serious trouble for taking you like this." "Please don't take me back," she begged, tears welling in her eyes. "Not without Jasmine. I promised I'd protect her." Robert's heart ached for the girl. He remembered making a similar promise to Emily years ago, that he would always keep her safe, a promise he had failed to keep. "How about this?" he suggested. "We'll get some dinner, something yummy, and then I'll drive you back. I won't get you in trouble, I promise." Carla wiped her eyes on her sleeve, but remained silent, a picture of dejection. Robert was about to start the car when he noticed movement from the camper van. The headlights flicked on, illuminating the trees in harsh white light. "They're leaving," he murmured, watching as the camper began to pull away from its spot. As it drove past their parked car, Robert caught a glimpse of someone through the side window, a woman with auburn hair, closing the curtains of the camper one by one. For a split second, their eyes met through the glass. Emily? The name escaped his lips as a whisper. It couldn't be. And yet, there was something about her face, the shape of it, the set of her eyes, that was hauntingly familiar. It was how he had always imagined Emily would look as an adult, the same features that had smiled from countless age progression photos over the years. Without thinking, Robert started the car and pulled out onto the road, maintaining a careful distance behind the camper van. "What are you doing?" Carla asked, sitting up straighter. "I saw someone in that van," Robert explained, his voice tight with emotion. "A woman who might be my daughter." "Your daughter?" Robert nodded, keeping his eyes fixed on the taillights ahead. "My daughter Emily disappeared 20 years ago when she was 12 years old. Just like your sister, she vanished while I thought she was safe." As they drove, Robert's phone began to ring. Helen's name flashed on the screen. He hit the speaker button. "Robert, where are you?" Helen's voice filled the car, tense with worry. "I've been waiting at the apartment." "Helen, you're not going to believe this," Robert said, his words tumbling out in a rush. "I think I saw Emily. I'm following a camper van right now. There's a woman inside who looks just like her." "What? Robert, where exactly are you?" The alarm in Helen's voice was evident. "Are you sure it's her?" "I'm not sure of anything," Robert admitted. "But Helen, you know we always said Emily had that kind of face that never changed much, even as she grew. This woman, it's like seeing an older version of her, exactly how I imagined she would look now." "Robert, please be careful," Helen pleaded. "You don't know who these people are or what they're capable of." "I have to follow this lead, Helen. I have to know." "At least tell me where you—" Helen's voice cut off as Robert lost reception, the road taking them deeper into rural territory outside Fern Creek. For nearly an hour they followed the camper van along winding back roads, maintaining enough distance to avoid detection. Carla had fallen silent, occasionally pointing out turnoffs to help him keep track of their quarry. Finally, the van turned onto a gravel drive that led to a large house set back from the road. It wasn't a mansion by any means, but it was substantial, a 2-story farmhouse-style building with a wraparound porch and detached garage. Robert killed his headlights and pulled over on the side of the road, about 100 yards from the property's entrance. From this vantage point, partially concealed by trees, he could observe the house without being immediately visible. "What are we doing now?" Carla whispered. "Why are we here?" Robert turned to her, suddenly aware of how strange and potentially frightening this situation must be for her. "I'm sorry, Carla. I should have taken you back to the orphanage, but you're not the only one who lost someone you love. My daughter Emily disappeared 20 years ago, and I think I just saw her in that camper van. That's why I followed them here." Carla's eyes widened with understanding. "You think the bad men took your daughter too?" "I don't know," Robert admitted, "but I intend to find out." He focused his attention back on the house, watching as the camper van parked near the front steps. Mike emerged first, followed by a woman holding a child by the hand. Unmistakably, the little girl from the toy shop, Jasmine. "That's her," Carla whispered excitedly. "That's my sister." As the woman moved into the light cast by the porch lamp, Robert's breath caught in his throat. She was tall and slender, with the same auburn hair that Emily had inherited from Helen. Even from this distance, he could see that she moved with a grace that reminded him painfully of his daughter. And then, to his shock, another figure stepped out of the van, the man in the cowboy hat. But he wasn't wearing his hat now, and under the bright porch light, Robert could clearly see his face, the same man he had seen in the DMV photo at the police station. It was Victor Manson. "He lied," Robert muttered. Mike said Manson was out of town, but he was with them the entire time. And the girl? She was in the van the whole time, too. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. If Manson had been lying about his whereabouts, what else was he hiding? And if the woman with him was indeed Emily, what horrors had she endured all these years? Robert's first instinct was to storm the house, confront Manson, and demand answers. But reason prevailed. He was outnumbered, potentially outgunned, and had a child with him. The situation required caution. He reached for his phone to call Detective Marshall, only to realize he had no signal this far from town. He was on his own, with no backup and no plan. As he debated his next move, a sharp knock on the driver's side window made him jump. He turned to see Mike's face pressed against the glass, his expression murderous. "Stay in the car," Robert instructed Carla, his voice low and urgent. "Lock the doors." He rolled down the window just enough to speak. "Mike, I was just about to leave." "Like hell you were," Mike spat. "You followed us all the way out here. What are you, some kind of stalker?" Robert's mind raced for an explanation that wouldn't escalate the situation. "The girl wanted to see her sister one last time. I thought if we could just talk to you reasonably—" "You're trespassing on private property," Mike cut him off. "I don't know who you think you are, but you've crossed a line. Both of you need to come with me now." "I don't think that's a good idea," Robert replied, his hand hovering near the ignition. Mike's expression darkened. "It wasn't a request. Either you both come willingly, or I radio the house and we handle this differently." He patted something under his jacket, the outline of what could only be a gun. Robert's blood ran cold, but he knew he had to remain calm for Carla's sake. "All right," he said, slowly opening the door. "We'll come talk. No need for things to get out of hand." As Carla reluctantly emerged from the passenger side, Mike escorted them toward the house. Robert's eyes darted around, taking in details that might help them later: the layout of the property, the number of vehicles, possible escape routes. "You're making a mistake," Mike warned as they approached the porch. "The boss isn't going to like this intrusion." "All I want is to understand what's happening here," Robert replied, placing a protective hand on Carla's shoulder. Before they reached the steps, the front door opened and Victor Manson himself appeared, his face a mask of cold fury. "Who are these people?" he demanded of Mike. "The man was watching the house," Mike explained. "He's got the brat with him, Carla, the sister." Manson's eyes narrowed as he studied Robert. "And who exactly are you?" "My name is Robert Whitmore," he answered, straightening his shoulders. "I believe you have something, or someone, that belongs to me." Before Manson could respond, the woman Robert had seen earlier appeared in the doorway behind him. She froze when she saw Robert, her eyes widening in shock. At that moment, Robert heard the distinct sound of sirens in the distance. Mike swore under his breath, pulling out a radio. "Boss, we've got company coming. Sounds like cops." Manson's face contorted with rage. "How did they find us?" "Did you lead them here?" he shouted at Robert. Robert shook his head. "My wife must have called them when I didn't return. She knew I was following your van." The woman in the doorway continued to stare at Robert, a complex mixture of emotions playing across her face. Recognition, fear, hope, all flashing in eyes that were undeniably familiar. "Lena, get inside," Manson ordered sharply. But the woman, Lena, didn't move, her gaze locked with Robert's. "Emily?" Robert whispered, his voice cracking. "Emily Grace?" Something shifted in the woman's expression, a faint tremor running through her body at the sound of the name. The sirens grew louder, and Manson's demeanor changed from anger to cold calculation. "Mike, get everyone inside. Bring them, too." He jerked his head toward Robert and Carla. "We'll handle this my way." As they were ushered into the house, Robert saw Jasmine sitting on a sofa in the living room, her eyes wide with fear. Carla immediately tried to run to her, but Mike held her back. The police sirens were now unmistakably close. Through the front window, Robert could see flashing lights approaching the property. "Victor," Mike said urgently, "what's the plan here?" Manson disappeared into another room, returning moments later with a gun. "Tell them we're loaded and ready," he instructed. Robert's heart raced. The situation was spiraling dangerously out of control. The woman, Emily, Lena, stood motionless by the fireplace, her face pale. Within minutes, police cars had surrounded the property. A voice came over a loudspeaker identifying them as Fern Creek Police Department and requesting that everyone exit the house with their hands up. "Nobody moves," Manson growled, positioning himself by the window. "Mike, bring the girl here." Mike grabbed Jasmine roughly by the arm, dragging her toward Manson. Carla screamed and lunged forward, but Robert held her back, knowing any sudden movements could provoke violence. "Let her go," Robert said firmly. "She's just a child. This is between us adults." Manson let out a harsh, grating laugh. "You have no idea what you're involved in, Whitmore. You should have called the police back at the park and either returned the girl or stayed out of it altogether." Outside, Detective Marshall's voice came over the loudspeaker. "This is Detective Marshall of the Fern Creek Police Department. The house is surrounded. Come out peacefully, and no one will be harmed." Manson turned to the woman. "Lena, come here. Tell them everything is fine, that you're here willingly, and the girl, Jasmine, is our newly adopted daughter." The woman hesitated, her eyes flicking between Manson and Robert. "Now, Lena!" Manson barked. Slowly, she moved toward him, but stopped halfway across the room. "I can't do this anymore, Victor," she said, her voice barely audible. "What did you say?" Manson's face darkened ominously. "I said I can't do this anymore." Her voice was stronger now, more resolute. She turned to Robert. You're really my father, aren't you?" Robert nodded, tears forming in his eyes. "Emily, we never stopped looking for you. Never." "Lena, I am warning you," Manson said, raising the gun. "Get over here now." But Emily, for Robert was now certain it was her, stood her ground. "No, Victor, it's over." In a flash, Manson swung the gun toward Robert. "You did this. You turned her against me." Everything happened in a blur after that. Emily lunged for Manson as he aimed at Robert. There was a struggle, the deafening report of a gunshot, and then another. Robert cried out in horror, certain he was about to witness his or his daughter's death just moments after finding her. But when the chaos cleared, it was Manson who lay on the floor, blood spreading across his chest. Emily stood over him, a smaller handgun in her trembling hands, while her own arm bled from a grazing wound. Without a second thought, Robert stepped in and kicked the guns out of reach. Before Mike could react, police burst through the front door, weapons drawn. "Police, everyone down! Hands where we can see them!" Robert dropped to his knees, pulling Carla down with him. Mike was quickly subdued and handcuffed. Medical personnel rushed in, first tending to Manson, who was still alive despite his serious wound, then to Emily. Moments later, another team arrived to attend to the two girls, securing and assessing them with care. As the paramedics bandaged Emily's arm, Robert watched from a few feet away, hardly daring to believe that after 20 years he was in the same room as his daughter. The hospital corridor buzzed with activity as medical staff moved efficiently between rooms. Robert sat on an uncomfortable plastic chair outside the treatment room where doctors were tending to Emily's gunshot wound. He could hardly believe that after 20 years of searching, of hoping against hope, his daughter was alive and just behind that door. Detective Marshall approached, his expression grave but kind. "Mr. Whitmore, the doctors say your daughter's injury is relatively minor. The bullet grazed her upper arm, requiring stitches, but no surgery." Robert nodded, relief washing over him. "And Manson?" "In surgery," the detective replied. "The bullet hit his chest, but missed his heart. They're working to stabilize him now." "What about the girls, Carla and Jasmine?" "They're with Child Protective Services in the pediatric wing. They're physically unharmed, but understandably shaken." Robert rubbed his face, the events of the day catching up with him. Helen had arrived at the hospital an hour earlier, frantic with worry, after calling the police when Robert didn't return or answer his phone. The police were able to reach the rental company, track the car's GPS, and locate it on Manson's property. She was now in the cafeteria, getting coffee for them both. The door to the treatment room opened, and a doctor emerged. "Mr. Whitmore, you can see your daughter now. We've finished with the stitches, and she's resting comfortably." Robert's heart pounded as he entered the room. Emily lay on the hospital bed, her arm bandaged, her face pale but calm. She looked up as he approached, her green eyes, Helen's eyes, studying him with a mixture of uncertainty and hope. "Emily?" he whispered, stopping at the foot of her bed, afraid to approach too quickly and frighten her. "Dad," she replied, her voice breaking on the word. "It's really you." That single word, Dad, broke something inside Robert. Tears he had held back for hours spilled down his cheeks as he moved to her side, gently taking her uninjured hand in his. "I never stopped looking for you," he said. "Not for a single day." Emily's own eyes filled with tears. "I thought you were dead. Victor told me. He said no one was looking for me anymore, that you and Mom had been killed in a car accident." The door opened again, and Helen entered, stopping short at the sight of her daughter. "Emily," she breathed, her coffee cups forgotten in her hands. "Mom?" Emily's voice was small, childlike. Helen set the cups down with shaking hands and rushed to the bedside, embracing her daughter with gentle care for her injured arm. The three of them clung to each other, 20 years of separation dissolving in a flood of tears and half-formed words. Eventually, Detective Marshall knocked softly and entered the room. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, "but I need to take your statement, Ms. Whitmore. Or, do you prefer to be called something else?" Emily sat up straighter, wiping her eyes. "My name is Emily Grace Whitmore," she said firmly. "He called me Lena, but that was never my name." Over the next hour, Emily recounted her ordeal, her voice steady despite the horror of her story. She described how Victor Manson, a trucker at the time, had abducted her while she was rollerblading to her friend's house. "He told me there had been a robbery nearby, that it wasn't safe," she explained. "When I refused to go with him, he grabbed me and put something over my face, a cloth with chemicals. I woke up in his truck, hundreds of miles away." She described how Manson had kept her hidden, moving frequently between states, using back roads to avoid interstate checkpoints. "Sometimes he would hide me in a false compartment in his truck. He never stayed in one place for long, except for Fern Creek. We would come back here about once a month, when he would check on his business." "The pawn shop?" Detective Marshall asked, taking notes. Emily nodded. "Timber treasures?" "It was his base of operations in a way. He has other identities, other businesses in different towns. He deals in stolen goods, among other things." "Why didn't you try to escape?" Helen asked gently. "Especially as you got older." Emily's eyes lowered. "I did at first, but each time he caught me, the punishments got worse. And he told me no one was looking for me anymore, that you were both dead. Eventually, I just stopped trying. It was easier to survive by playing along." "When did he start calling you his wife?" Detective Marshall asked. "When I turned 18, Emily replied, her voice hollow. "That's when he started taking me to meet his men and acquaintances, introducing me as Lena, his quiet, shy wife. But most of the time, I was still kept isolated." Detective Marshall's expression darkened as he wrote in his notepad. "Emily, do you know why Victor adopted Jasmine from the orphanage? Was it a legal adoption?" Emily's face clouded, and she gripped the bedsheet with her good hand. "I don't know all the details, but—" She paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "A few months ago, I overheard Victor talking to Mike. He said I was getting old and that he wanted—" Her voice faltered. Robert placed his hand over hers, offering silent support. Emily took a deep breath and continued. He said he wanted a new girl, a young one. He told Mike he was looking for a second wife. He said he would still keep me, but wanted what he called a fresh bud. Disgust and pain crossed her face as she recounted the conversation. Helen covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. They searched for a while, Emily continued. Then they found Jasmine at the orphanage. I don't know how they arranged the adoption, but it couldn't have been legal. Victor always preferred to do things off the books. He's involved in all sorts of illegal trades and deals. He's paranoid about his identity and keeps changing it depending on which town he's in. Detective Marshall's jaw tightened. We'll be conducting a full investigation with the orphanage and examining the records at Timber Treasures. If there was any corruption or bribery involved, we'll find it. What's going to happen to Victor? Robert asked, his voice hard with barely controlled rage. He'll face charges for Emily's kidnapping, illegal imprisonment, child endangerment regarding Jasmine, weapons charges, and attempted murder, the detective replied. That's just the beginning. As we investigate his other operations, there will likely be additional charges. Robert nodded, satisfied that the man who had stolen his daughter's life wouldn't escape justice. A knock at the door interrupted them. A nurse entered, followed by a woman in a CPS uniform escorting Carla and Jasmine. The girls wanted to see you, the CPS worker explained. They've been asking for you since they arrived. Carla rushed forward, stopping just short of the bed. Are you okay? She asked Emily. Did the bad man hurt you bad? Emily smiled gently. I'll be fine. It's just a scratch. How are you and Jasmine doing? Jasmine, half hidden behind her sister, peered up with wide eyes. Are we going back to the orphanage? She asked in a small voice. Before the CPS worker could answer, Robert spoke up. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about that. He turned to the worker. I know it's not possible for us to adopt them right now. We live out of state, and there would be a lot of paperwork and home studies. But I'd like to help arrange for them to be placed in a better facility, and I'd like to provide financial support for their care and education. Emily reached out her good hand to Carla. You saved me, you know that? If you hadn't been brave enough to find help, I might never have found my family again. Carla beamed with pride. You saved my sister, too. The CPS worker nodded. We'll certainly discuss options for the girls' placement, and financial support would be greatly appreciated. As evening fell, the hospital room became a hub of activity. Doctors came to check on Emily. Police officers arrived with updates about the investigation, and Helen made countless phone calls to family members back home, sharing the miraculous news. Victor Manson had survived surgery but remained in critical condition. Mike and 3 other men associated with Manson's operation had been arrested and were providing information to the authorities, revealing a network of illegal activities spanning several states. When the room finally quieted, Robert found himself sitting beside Emily's bed, watching her sleep. Her face, so familiar yet changed by the years, looked peaceful for perhaps the first time in decades. Helen sat on the other side, her hand resting lightly on Emily's uninjured arm. 20 years, she whispered. I never thought we'd see this day. Thank you for making me go on this holiday, Robert whispered, his voice barely audible past the lump in his throat. After all the searching, all the dead ends and disappointments, Emily had been found because of a pair of rollerblades in a junk shop window and the courage of a little girl who wouldn't give up on her sister. Life had taken so much from them, 20 years of birthdays and holidays, of ordinary days and special moments that could never be reclaimed. But sitting here, watching his daughter breathe, Robert knew that what mattered most was not what had been lost, but what had been found. The darkness that had enveloped their lives for 2 decades was finally lifting. There would be challenges ahead. Emily would need time and support to heal from her trauma, and they would all need to learn how to be a family again. The journey wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in 20 years, they would walk that journey together. Outside the hospital window, stars began to appear in the evening sky. Robert remembered how Emily had loved stargazing as a child, how she would make wishes on the first star she saw each night. Tonight, for the first time in 20 years, he didn't need to make a wish. The miracle he had been praying for all these years was sleeping peacefully before him, finally home where she belonged.